Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is 6 o'clock according to my time where I am in the world. It is 7 o'clock where our distinguished speakers, visiting lecturers are. And it is 12 o'clock in Montreal where Jennifer is and where many of you, our friends of the Israeli Institute and the interested community are currently. My name is Csaba Nikolényi. I'm director of the Israeli Institute of Israel Studies. And I'm so delighted to be able to welcome each and every one of you back to what, sadly, unfortunately, is the last important event, is the last important intellectual treat that we are bringing to you during the 2020 calendar year. Our distinguished visiting speakers, lecturers are today Professor Doron and Professor Kobi Cohen-Hattab, who are joining us from Israel in what is going to be the Montreal book launch of their new book about the Kotel, the Western Wall, the holiest site of the Jewish world in Jerusalem and in Israel, but really also in the entire world. With your permission, let me briefly introduce to you our two speakers, and then I am going to turn the floor over to them so that they could tell us about the important contributions that they are making in this book. Professor Doron is a professor and president also at the Schechter Institute of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem. He's a historical geographer who studies popular and civic holy places in the history of Palestine and the State of Israel. Professor Doron has published articles on the history of pilgrimage to Palestine during late antiquity and the 19th century. He's also engaged in the research of Jewish holy places in the State of Israel and the development of national holy sites. His many books include the following: Sanctifying the Land, the Jewish Holy Places in the State of Israel, 1948 to 1968, published by the Ben Gurion Institute in the Negev and the Yad Yitzhak Ben Tzvi, as well as The Landscape and Ideology, the Reinterment of Renowned Jews in the Land of Israel, 1904-1967. He also has a book on the planning and building of Yad Vashem between 1942 and 1975, which is expected to be published by Yad Vashem Press and the Greuter in calendar year 2021. Our second speaker, Professor Kobi Cohen-Hattab, is a professor at the Department of Land of Israel Studies and Archaeology at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. His main research interests are historical geography of tourism, tourism in historical towns, the relationships between Zionism and the sea, and the development of holy sites. Professor Cohen-Hattab's books include Tour de Land, Tourism in Palestine during the British Mandate period, also Tourism, Religion, and Pilgrimage in Jerusalem, published by Routledge Press in 2014, a book that he co-authored with Professor Noam Shova. Also, The Maritime Revolution, the Yeshuv's hold on the sea and the shores of the land of Israel between 1917 in 1948, published by Yad Yitzhak Ben Tzvi, Yad Ben Tzvi Press in Jerusalem, 2019. If I understand, this work also came out in English. The English version was published in 2020 by the Greuter in Leiden. So we truly have a very distinguished panel that we are able to bring to you. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let me turn the floor over first to Professor Doron who will speak for about 20-25 minutes, to be followed by Professor Kobi Cohen-Hattab. Professor Doron the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Saba, and thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here and to lecture to you about this very important, interesting place, the Western Wall. I will start my part, and Kobi will follow in the second half of the lecture, and we will, of course, speak about the Western Wall after 1967, after the Six-Day War, and our book is actually about what happened in the Western Wall during this period, 1967 and year 2000. I just want to speak a little bit about our discipline. Both of us, Kobi and I, are historical geographers. And you can understand that what we do is a kind of a combination between history and geography. What we try to do is to understand how places look like during the past, in antiquity or during recent period. We try to understand how landscape developed during the years, during the centuries. These are, as Saba said, these are two of our recent books. Kobi, as you can see, published a book about the Zionism's maritime revolution, about the connection between the Zionist movement and in the sea. And I, as you can see, published a book about the reinterment of very important Jews who passed away in the diaspora, and later on their remains were reburied in the sacred Zionist ground of Palestine and then the land of Israel. So what we try to do is to see how landscape developed and evolved during earlier periods, and that's what we did during our recent research when we studied the development of the Western Wall during this period between 1967 and the year 2000. By the way, I just wanted to say a few sentences about the difficulties that we had choosing the right image for the cover of the book. Think about the following question: if you would write a book about the Western Wall, which photo will we choose for the cover? We didn't want to have on the cover of a book a typical ultra-Orthodox Jew who prays in front of the Kotel. We didn't want to put on the cover of the book an image of soldiers having a ceremony in front of the Kotel. We wanted and we looked for something special, and this is a photo that we found in one of the archives. Both of us think that it's a wonderful photo of the Kotel and very unique. As you can see, it's a kind of a ladder that climbs to the upper part of the Western Wall. You can see here maybe an Oriental Jew who is covered who is blowing the shofar and having a shawl on him, talit, and of course some soldiers. And the issue of our book are, of course, the disputes. The disputes around the Western Wall between the year 1967 and the year 2000, and we think that this picture shows a lot of these debates and controversies and disputes over the Western Wall. What we'll do today, and what we did in the book, we divided our research into 4 chapters. The first chapter was about the archaeological excavations in the area of the Western Wall, and I will start by speaking with this. The second chapter is devoted to the non-planning of the Western Wall. We show in the book that there were many architectural plans, and when many ways people thought about how to develop this the plaza in front of the Western Wall and how to develop it. In reality, nothing happened, and the plaza remained as it was after 1967. So this is the second chapter of the book. The third chapter is about the question of the Western Wall. Is it only a Jewish holy place, or is it also a Zionist Israeli holy site? And you can see in front of you one of the ceremonies. The IDF was having ceremonies there. And the fourth quarter is about the non-Orthodox groups and their attempts to break down the monopoly of the Orthodox Jews in the Western Wall. And I'm speaking about the Reform movement, the Conservative movement, and I'm speaking also about the women of the wall and their development in the Western Wall. Few words about the history of the Western Wall. We don't have much time to speak about this, but after the destruction of Jerusalem, after the year 70, we have few testimonies about Jews who are praying on top of the platform. We have such testimony from the 4th century. And later on, we have testimonies about Jews praying around the Temple Mount, around the in the other walls. But gradually, we learn from, let's say, from the Crusader period, from the 12th century onwards, we have lots of testimonies about Jews who are praying in front of the Western Wall. It seems that only from the 16th century, Jews gradually started to pray in what we call today the Western Wall, this small plaza in front of the Mughrabian quarter. And this is the time when we have the Western Wall appears in drawings, in maps of the holy places in Palestine of that time. During the 19th century, we have also some photos of the Western Wall, and we see how small the plaza in front of the wall was. Of course, it was a very small area, and especially during the holidays, there were many Jews who congregated there, prayed there, and you can see in the left photo, you can see the location of the Western Wall in front of the Mughrabian neighborhood that was destroyed right after the 6-Day War, and I will speak about this in few minutes. We have to say a few words about the fact that during the first half of the 20th century, the Western Wall, the Kotel, was gradually seen not only as a Jewish holy place, but also gradually as a Zionist holy place. And this has to do with the clashes between the Arabs and the Jews in Palestine of that time, and in Jerusalem more specifically. And gradually, we have lots of testimonies and lots of written sources about the shift among the Zionist movement towards the Jewish, this Jewish holy place, and it was seen during the time as a national, gradually as a national holy place. This is important, of course, because of what happened after 1967 in the Western Wall. So here comes this war, the 1967 war, when during this war, not only Judea and Samaria were taken over by Israel, but also the Old City. And with the Old City, the Temple Mount, and of course, not only the Temple Mount, but also the Western Wall. For 19 years, there were no Israelis, no Jews and Israelis visiting the place, but here we have a very sharp change that happened in the Western Wall. We have these very famous photos of the IDF soldiers, and lots of visitors were coming by thousands to visit the site. This is a very important picture of the Western Wall, maybe even during the war. And those of you who read Hebrew can read that it's written here, Beit Knesset, synagogue. Here starts, at this point, right after the war, starts a huge debate. What is the Western Wall? Is it a Jewish holy place, or is it an Israeli holy place? This is something that we treat in our book, this question. And here you can see that it was actually decided right after the war that the Western Wall is a kind of a synagogue. the war created a major physical change in the Western Wall, because what happened is that only 2 or 3 days after the end of the war, bulldozers came to the area of the Western Wall and destroyed, demolished the dozens of houses, of Arab houses, part of the Mugrabin quarter that I just showed earlier. So all of these houses were destroyed during one night, and in front of the Western Wall, we have now a huge plaza. The reason for that was that it was anticipated that thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of Israelis will want to come and visit this holy place. These 19 years of yearning, of thinking about the Western Wall, but not being able to visit the place. The anticipation during the war, the anxiety during the war, created the anticipation that many Israelis will come to the place, and that was maybe one of the main reasons to destroy these houses and to create this huge plaza. And indeed, as you can see in this wonderful photo of the Western Wall Plaza, as you can see, that's a picture taken at the beginning of July 1967. So we speak about, let's say, 1 month after the end of the war. And this is one of the best pictures, a picture that I like very much, because what you can see in front of you are the thousands of Israelis who are flowing and coming to visit the site. And the fact that you can see all of these Israelis together, dancing in front of the wall, celebrating the victory, excitement, women and men together dancing in front of the wall, and of course this huge plaza, as I said, that has to be treated, as you will hear, during this period. So now I want to speak to say a few sentences about the issue of archaeology and sanctity at the Western Wall and around the area of the Western Wall. As many of you know, and I'm sure that many of you visited Jerusalem and visited the sites around the Western Wall. You know the Davidson Center, you know the Western Wall Tunnel. What we wanted to do in our book is to understand how these archaeological sites were created and when were they created. And they were created right after the war. Archaeology was still, during this time, a kind of a religion. The Israelis were occupied with, and still maybe are, very much with their past. So there was a big desire to go below the current surface of the old city and to understand, to see how this area looked like in antiquity. And more specifically, there was a desire to be connected to the more ancient periods of Jerusalem, and to be more specifically to the first and second temple periods in the history of Jerusalem. Those wonderful, glorious times in the history of Jerusalem. And that was the reason why, from the two sides of the Western Wall, from the south and from the north, there were two huge projects of excavations. To the south of the Western Wall, we have Professor Benjamin Mazar, the rector of the Hebrew University and archaeologist, who started to dig around the western southern corner of the Western Wall. And to the north of the Western Wall Plaza, we have this Western Wall tunnel that I'm sure that many of you walked when you visited Jerusalem. I'm sure you know this place. Let's start with Professor Binyamin Mazar, as you can see here in this photo, and next to him, Binyamin Mazar is the guy with the hat. Next to him, we have the Prime Minister of Israel, Levi Eshkol, who is being accompanied by Professor Binyamin Mazar, and this was a national project. The Israeli government supported these archaeological excavations. There were groups of volunteers coming from different schools in Israel, coming from abroad to excavate the area of the Western Wall. The ambition was to find the remains of our history. And as I said, our history is, of course, the time of Herod the Great, or the time of David and Solomon. That was the desire. And indeed, there were great remains found during these excavations. We are just bringing here one of the examples. This very important remain of the stone of Bet HaTki'ah, something that is described by Josephus Flavius and also in the Mishnah about a ceremony that was done before the entrance of Shabbat. And look how wonderful this stone with the inscription in Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew. By the way, this stone is being kept today in the Israel Museum. So it was a big excitement among the Israelis when they read in the newspapers about these archaeological excavations. So this is Binyamin Mazar, and to the north of the Western Wall Plaza, we have the Western Wall Tunnel that was created right after, it was started to be created right after the Six-Day War, when the Ministry of Religion, think how strange it is, the Ministry of Religion started to excavate along the Western Wall to the north. At the beginning, it was seen as a kind of a synagogue, but later on, it was a kind of a tunnel dug along the Western Wall, and the desire was to expose the entire length of the Western Wall and to present it to those people who would come to visit Jerusalem. At the beginning, by the way, look at this map. At the beginning, they thought about maybe demolishing, destroying parts of the Muslim quarter, and by this to expose the western and northern walls of the Temple Mount. But later on, they decided to dig this tunnel, and you can see the plans that we found in the archives. You can see those photos that we found in the archives. It was a massive project that was done by the Ministry of Religion of that time. So this is one chapter of our book. Another chapter is about the issue of planning the Western Wall Plaza. And I'm returning back to these moments after the Six-Day War when this plaza was created. Again, houses that were destroyed. No one thought about what will happen in the future. They wanted to have this space for them. Many pilgrims who started to venerate, started to come to this place. And really at the beginning, there was a kind of a small scale, temporary architectural plans for the Western Wall. Here, this map that we found in the archives, it's the most earlier plan that we found. Look at the date. It's July 20th, 1967. Few weeks after the end of the war, that's the time when we have the first plan of the Western Wall Plaza. And you can see those two arrows that we put on the map. The blue arrow is the place, it's the place closer to the Western Wall itself. And this is the prayer plaza. That's the place where if you wanted to pray, you will come to this area. And the red arrow is the place where you can gather, you can be a tourist and stand there. You can come with your wife and stand together. This is not something that is allowed when you come closer to the wall, because there is a barrier between the side of the man and the side of the woman. So this is the most earliest map that we have of the planning of the Western Wall. And there was indeed a desire to plan and to have a much grandiose, much more important plan of the plaza in front of the Western Wall. And what happens from 1968 onwards is that we have a series of designs of the Western Wall Plaza. This is one of the earliest ones. As you can see, it's Louis Kahn's plan of the Hoover Synagogue and the Western Wall. Louis Kahn is very famous American Jewish architect who lived in Philadelphia, and he planned the Hoover Synagogue. We have from this period a series of planning vision about how the place should look like in the future, like this survey that we found, the planning survey of the Western Wall area that was published in August 1971. We have also this very interesting plan that was suggested by Isamu Noguchi, the artist who was involved in the planning of the Israeli Museum, and he created this very unusual development plan of the Western Wall that was, of course, never implemented. In 1973, Moshe Safdie, the Canadian architect, suggested this interesting, wonderful plan of the Western Wall Plaza. And because of political issues, it was not adopted eventually, and it was deserted, I would say, and it was part of a series of many plans that were done by very famous Israeli architects about how to solve the issue of how to plan a Jewish holy site. Think about the following point. This was one of the first times in the history of Israel that a holy site could be planned and developed. How should we develop a Jewish and an Israeli holy site? That was the question during this period, and it was never solved, this issue, because eventually what happened is that the temporary plaza that was done by Yosef Schenberger, the one that I showed you earlier, the one from 1967, was left until today. As you know, when we come and visit the Western Wall, it is very similar to the way the place looked like right after the war, right after 1967. So this is another chapter in the book about the planning of the Western Wall after the war. So I'm now handing over the presentation to Kobi.
Thank you very much, Professor Bar. Professor Cohen-Hattab, just need to unmute you.
Could you hear me?
Now it's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, Doron, for doing the introduction and introduce the first two chapters of our book. And I will continue from this point to the other two chapters that the book is included. Now, the third chapter is about the Western Wall as a national Israeli symbol. Now, the new reality that emerged at the Western Wall in 1967, when for the first time the State of Israel gained control of the site and began to oversee it, forced the state's leaders and institutions to, hold a second, why it's not moving? To confront its definition, and the main resource question that lied in the heart of this in our chapter was the Western Wall solely a Jewish holy site, as it had been in generations, or did it now also bear historical and national meanings? And consequently, should the wall's environment become a space serving the entire Israeli and Jewish public, or should it be dedicated exclusively to the Jewish religious ritual? The post-war decision regarding the development of the Western Wall as a national symbol touched on the tension between state and religion. In the case of the State of Israel, this became particularly complex due to the state's self-definition as a Jewish and democratic. The separation of state and religion has been the subject of ongoing debate since the state's inception. On one hand, some of the secular public has argued that the secular Jews do not wish to observe religious precepts. A modern democratic state should not force its citizens to observe religious laws. On the other hand, some of the religious public counters that separating state and religion will lead to the loss of Israeli character as a Jewish state. Over the years, heated arguments over religious-state relations have been stirred by legislation pretending to conversion, marriage and divorce, kashrut, and Shabbat in the public space. Amid 2000 playing out in Israeli society over the state's character in recent decades, the Western Wall gained a new identity, becoming a battleground between religious and national aspirations. The wall became a space of both battle and bonding, a place where religion and nationality were meant to blend, a symbol of national and religious symbiosis that flourished in the wake of the Six-Day War. The third chapter of our book addresses these topics. It explores the considerable change that occurred in the Western Wall unique status in the years following the Six-Day War, with the site becoming a silent Jewish and Israeli symbol. It examines the process that cemented the Western Wall's position as a national site that combined numerous components of Jewish identity and served as a permanent Israeli national plaza. As Doron just started to develop the subject. In the 50 years that have elapsed since 1967, the connection between the IDF and the Western Wall has grown significantly stronger. The Paratroopers Brigade, the liberators of the Western Wall during the war, was the first to conduct ceremonies at the wall just after his relief. Later, as the connection between the IDF and the Western Wall deepened, Israelis held annual Memorial Day ceremonies there, as well as swearing-in ceremonies for the new IDF recruits. However, the increased military presence at the Western Wall Plaza stirred some oppositions. Even though the ceremonies were conducted under the auspice of the Minister of Religion and the Rabbi of the Western Wall, the latter was openly opposed to the increase in the number of units holding ceremonies there. They sometimes sparked friction with whispers, particularly the ultra-Orthodox community, from whom the presence of military units was blunted expressions of Israeli statehood, which many of them opposed. Israeli instituted a new ceremony, a new commemoration after the war, Jerusalem Day, to be celebrated at the Western Wall on the 20th of Iyar, the Jewish calendar data on the Old Cities chapter during the Six-Day War. This annual event combined military, religious, and national components. More than 50,000 people, including many diaspora Jews, participated in this first Jerusalem Day ceremony held at the Western Wall, a year after the military victory. The ceremony, which officially launched the Year of the Western Wall, featured prayers including memorial prayer for fallen soldiers and prayer for the state, as well as the singing of the national anthem Hatikva. The variety of Jerusalem Day events increased with the years, but the celebration at the Western Wall remained central. This Jerusalem Day tradition reinforced the holiness of the site and helped to strengthen its national significance. The celebrating crowds grew from year to year and included ministers, rabbis, IDF officers, and public figures. One salient example of the efforts to marshal the Western Wall's symbolism was the struggle for the freedom of the Soviet Jewry in the early 70s, when protests relies against the Soviet authorities were held at the Western Wall Plaza. Immigrants from the Soviet Union also held hunger strikes at the Western Wall in solidarity with those remains behind the Iron Curtain. Gathering at the Western Wall at times reflected national discord. In the early 80s, for example, a rally in the plaza protested Israeli withdrawal from the Sinai Peninsula following the signing of the peace treaty with Egypt. Now, in subtotal, in the national and religious favor that swept through the Israeli society after the Six-Day War, the Western Wall served as a source of identification for diverse expressions of Israeli identity and accommodate a reality broad range of worldviews, from religious traditions and perhaps even ultra-Orthodox perspectives to civil national ones. This reality was made possible largely through the spatial separation between religion and nationality at the site, as just Doron described a few seconds ago. The reality was made, the prayer area served as a spacious sacred area with the custom of Orthodox synagogue, upheld and religious ceremonies taking place in close proximity to the Western Wall. The distinct visitor plaza, on the other hand, was a civic space where tourists and visitors could watch from the short distance and where national ceremonies were conducted. As you can see here, the visit plaza here is for the ceremonies and the holy site was for the prayers. And the archaeological site, as Doron just described, was for the excavations. A near anonymous Israeli consensus developed around the site's civil and sacred symbols, and particularly around the ceremony on the eve of Memorial Day. Some of the religious streams, but primarily the national religious sector, now accorded religious significance to the national symbols associated with the Western Wall. For secular Jews, this national connection breathed new meaning into the site's traditional religious symbolism. As the national Israeli character of the sites grew stronger, its status as a holy place and a site of worship, especially for the Jewish Orthodox community, also reached unprecedented prominence. Now, about the fourth chapter of our book, the chronicles of the Western Wall after the Six-Day War included the struggle for the right of the alternative, non-Orthodox prayer, and the feminist critiques of women's status at the site. With the Western Wall, a religious and a national symbol for Jews in Israel and abroad, religious control at the site and the imposition of religious norms became a prominent and significant issue. In the unique political circumstances of the post-war era, the Western Wall became a place of prayer dominated exclusively by the Orthodox Judaism, as Doron mentioned, and remains so. Worshippers belonging to conservative and reform movements in Israel and in the diaspora were not recognized as equal. The rights to pray at the wall and influence prayer arrangements there was denied. The Reform and the conservative Jews requested to pray at the Western Wall in accordance with their customs, with no separation between men and women, and later, the wish of the Women of the Wall movement to pray at the plaza, wrapped in prayer shawls, met with fierce opposition on the part of the religious and Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox circles. State authorities were unwilling to change the status quo that had emerged at the plaza after the war. The fact that they were barred from praying at the site according to their customs caused many in the Reform and conservative communities, women and men alike, to feel that the Western Wall had been taken from them, unable as they were to share in its religious and national symbolic status. Over the years, this has led to a series of crises between the State of Israel and diaspora Jewry. Behind the practical matter of praying at the site, after 1967, the attitude towards the wall became a major question of identity and mindset for the various Jewish denominations. Although this question has evolved over the years, it continued to occupy Jewish public consciousness to this day and is a central controversy in the Israel-diaspora relationship. The issues of prayer at the Western Wall, however, was never discussed independently. It was always an element within a wider discourse touching on the relationship between state and religion in Israel, along with issues such as the conservative and reform movements' right to perform conversions or the movement's representations on local religious councils in Israel. However, events at the wall cast these issues into sharp relief. The conflicts at the holy sites involved not only the right to pray there, but also, and most prominently, the question of Jewish religious authority in general, the affirmation of Jewish tradition or rebellion against it, the status of women in Judaism, and the inclusions or the exclusion of others, alternative Jewish traditions in the State of Israel and its institutions. Few pictures about this dispute and clashes at the plaza. Now, if we came to the conclusions of our book is not a journalist essay on all that transpired at the Western Wall over the past 50 years. It is rather a selective examination of a number of themes that are tied to the wall and its chronicles. We have chosen, as Doron described, we have chosen to analyze the phenomenon of the Western Wall between 1967 in 4 levels. The first level is the past and the present. The desire of Israeli public and its leaders to uncover the secrets of the storied Jewish history in the area, to burrow in the ground around the plaza, had a major effect on the space's surface and on the way in which its significance was highlighted. The Western Wall excavations to the south of the Prayer Plaza and the Western Wall tunnels in its north summarize the efforts made in the years following the war to tie the past to the future and ancient sanctity to modern sanctity. The second conclusion is about the planning and development. The period was characterized by the widespread preoccupation with the question of the plaza architectural plan. The demolition of the Mugabe neighborhood's homes and the creation of open plaza at the base of the sacred wall constitute an opportunity to shape the Western Wall environs for coming visits and to develop it as a Jewish and Israeli Hollywood space. But it also forced the state's leader to make crucial decisions for the public about the place's very identity. Ultimately, the temporary become permanent, and Moshe Sfadia's plan for the developing of the plaza was shelved. The next was about the religion and state. In the years after the war, an attempt was made to shape the Western Wall as a space bearing national meanings, and to cast it into Israeli meaning alongside its Jewish significance. This was an impressive innovation. The obvious Jewishness of the holy site was compounded by pretension to sanctify it as an Israeli heritage site. Despite the pretension, however, the national features disputed with time, and the religious sanctity of the place grow more firmly emerged. Now, responsibility and ownership. A prominent dispute has revolved around the Jewish Orthodox monopoly on the wares agenda and customs, which supplements other religious movements. This struggles further highlights the question of Western Wall's nature and undermines the perception of the place belongs to the Jewish Israeli public and diaspora Jewish as one. Events at the Western Wall between 1967 and year 2000 were significant at the sacred space itself, but they were also carried great weight for the country as a whole. One of the main conclusion is that the Western Wall became, in effect, a platform of a microcosmos of religious conflicts and political power placed in the country, in which different groups attempt to fight for their place in the Jewish and Israeli discourse. In the two generations that have elapsed since the state gained authority over the wall, it was the subject of much debate, with a variety of actors attempting to assert their influence over the space and within the greater Israeli discourse. The struggles between archaeologists and religious bodies, between those who would alter the physical space and those who opposed change, between those who sought a Jewish religious definition for the site and those who searched for its national and state symbolism, and between those who sought to topple the Orthodox monopoly and the Orthodox leaders and community, all were but one representation, the battle that raged with a greater Israeli society. Ultimately, it was Israeli inaction to shape the wall as it appears today. The differing decisions about the plaza designs and the evading confrontations with the religious establishment, the leadership allowed the wall to be defined more as Jewish religious space than an Israeli heritage site, one that is zealously guarded by Orthodox community. Now, our examinations ended with the year 2000, and the gains made by non-Orthodox and women's groups in their battles against the Orthodox monopoly. The 2 decades that have elapsed since have been characterized by growing non-Orthodox activity and highly publicized struggle for formal recognition. We can only hope that this shift serves as a harbinger of things to come, ultimately leading the Western Wall Plaza, in which all Jews, Orthodox and non-Orthodox, identifying the site as an Israeli space and a Jewish one, can be and can find a home. And we are finishing our presentation with the Israel Plaza as it looks today, and a few words of wishful thinking maybe that this will be the final solution for the dispute over the Western Wall. Thank you very much. And this is our two books that are, the first one was already published, and the second one, which is in Hebrew, will be published in a few months in Magnus publication in Hebrew. So thank you again, and we are open the stage for question, I assume.
Thank you very much, Kobi. Thank you very much, Doron, for this fascinating talk. And as host and moderator, I particularly want to thank both of you for staying with such diligence and discipline right on time. So we are now opening the floor for a Q&A. And in the first instance, I would like to ask the audience to try and send their questions to us in the chat, through the chat box. And while we are waiting for the first few comments and questions to come in, let me perhaps abuse my privilege as moderator to put the initial salvo of questions to Doron and Kobi. Doron, my question to you has to do with an expression that you used a couple of times. Several times you raised the potential conflict, if you will, conceptual conflict over the Kotel as a Jewish holy site and as a Zionist holy site. Right. What is a Zionist holy site? If you could open that up a little bit more, that would be my question to you. And Kobi, my question to you has to do with the international aspect of the conflicts that you and Doron examine in the book. You stressed one particular international aspect of these issues by referring to Jewish Israel and diaspora relations. Now, much of the world always gets excited about so many things that happen in Israel. Did you encounter other international aspects to the Kotel issues? Does the Arab world watch carefully what happens, what Jews do in the Kotel when Jews excavate? Does that get any kind of special attention? Is that important? Or not at all? Those are really not central to examining the history of the issue. But what about the Christian world? Are they interested in following? Is there any indication following that as Jewish archaeologists are excavating and finding more material evidence to connect our past with our future and present? Is that attracting any kind of interest, critical or whatever, or not? So a little more engagement on the international aspect if you have. If not, that's also an important contribution, of course. And then I will start, while you answer the questions, I'm going to start collecting and organize the questions that are arriving in the chat box.
Okay, Kobi, do you want me to start and answer the question about the Zionist holy landscape? Is it okay, Kobi?
Okay, yes, of course.
Okay, so we speak about Zionist holy places and Israeli holy places before and after 1948. And my perception is that already before 1948, the Zionist movement started to create holy sites and sites of pilgrimage, places like we are now coming closer to Hanukkah. So the identification of the resting place of the Maccabean family next to Modi'in was a place of pilgrimage. Let's remember Tel Chai and Yosef Trumpeldor as a site of pilgrimage. Let's think about Masada as a site of pilgrimage already before 1948. And of course, after the establishment of the State of Israel, it was done in deliberate, specifically by the Israeli government and other bodies, the creation of a new landscape that was very far from those historical Jewish holy places that were, most of them were behind the enemy lines. The Western Wall during the time was behind the enemy lines. It was part of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. So the Israelis could not reach the Western Wall, and it was an opportunity to create, to develop a new kind of holy places. I wrote about the development of Mount Herzl, for example. I wrote about the fulfillment of Herzl's last will. You know, many of you know that he requested in his will to be reburied in Palestine, and it was done only after 1949. It was done during 1949, during August 1949, when his remains were removed from Vienna and were brought to Mount Herzl, and the local newspapers call Mount Herzl a holy site. This is a sacred ground, so it is written in the newspapers of the time. I'm finishing by saying that I'm not sure Mount Herzl and the Western Wall, I would speak about Mount Herzl. I'm not sure Mount Herzl is still a holy site for the Israelis. Maybe for one day, during the Independence Day. As you know, the opening of the ceremonies of the Independence Day are taking part next to Herzl's tomb. But we don't feel, I think, as strong as the Israelis felt during the 50s and 60s towards the Mount Herzl. And this is a question I ask my students each year when I teach about Jerusalem. Is there an Israeli flag in the Western Wall? What is your answer? Is there an Israeli flag in the Western Wall? What do you say?
Isn't there a big one in the middle?
Most of the students, the Israeli students, say no. There's no flag.
Yes.
There is some flag on behind, and there is, of course, a huge flag right at the heart of the plaza. But for most of the Israelis, there is no connection anymore between the Western Wall and the Israeliness of the site. And this is something that we treat in our book.
Wow, Doron, thank you for mentioning that anecdote. I will use that when I take my students to Jerusalem next time. Thank you.
Sure.
Kobi, before I would turn the floor over to you, let me just ask the audience for a better experience to please turn or switch to your speaker's view. That way you would be able to enjoy the presentation even better than you are currently. Kobi, please.
Yes, I may add that my first picture in my presentation is this picture with the flag in the middle of the plaza. By the way, this is one of the biggest flag in Israel in a public space. Yes, it's a huge flag, and not. And I think it's not. It's by intention, not. No, it's not by chance. Now, I may add to what Doron just described that I wrote a paper about Rachel's tomb, and I also made the connection between the holy sites and how this place became a Zionist, or a place that people are coming to visit there, not because it is a holy site, but because it became an Israeli or a Zionist symbol. So the connection between holy sites in Palestine and after that in the day of the State of Israel is very interesting, because the holy sites became such as a kushan, or a place that we are connected to them, and it's not just for the prayers or for the people who are coming to pray there, but for people who are believes that this is one of our connections to the land of Israel. And now, if I may, if I trying to answer your question, I'll be shorter than the answer of Doron, because in our book we've checked, as it in our subtitles is about the Israeli dispute, and what is happening in the area between others to the Kotel or to the Western Wall is really it's another research. We know that during the last decades, many Christians are coming to the Western Wall. Part of them are coming to this place and pray there. I know, for example, that there are Philippines in Israel that are coming to the plaza and making there such ceremonies and pray. That it's very interesting, but it's really another subject. We are our work is related to the connections between the Israeli society, or as we treat it as a microcosmos of the Israeli society, and your question is something else. It's very interesting, but it's another research.
Thank you very much, Kobi. And actually, the notion of the Kotel as a microcosm is going to come up in one of the questions that I will share with you in a moment. Okay. So we have 3 questions already from 2 members in the audience. The first one is from Professor Ira Robinson from Montreal, Concordia University, who is also a member of the academic advisory group of the Israeli Institute of Israel Studies. And Professor Robinson's question is as follows. The decision to demolish the Mughrabi houses in 1967 seems to have happened very quickly after the war. What archival documentation did you find concerning the decision-making process? And then we have 2 questions from Professor Sean Esther, who is joining us from Israel. I believe, Professor Esther, you're in Beersheba or Ramat Gan. I'm not sure. One of those 2 places, probably. Beersheba. So Professor Esther's first question is, to what extent do the changes and emphases in the Kotel correspond to changes and emphases in larger Israeli society? For example, the planning in 1967 reflected larger trends in Israeli society. The issue of women today reflect larger trends in Israeli society, etc., etc., etc. So very much connected to your last point, Kobi. And Professor Esther has another question about Zionist holy places. So to what extent are there still today pilgrimages to Zionist holy places? Perhaps the Kikar Rabin has become, for part of Israeli society, such a Zionist holy place, but for others, it has not. So I guess this question is more to Doron, but I guess either one of our speakers are welcome to answer.
Doron, you will start.
Maybe I will start by answering the questions about the Mughrabian quarter and the houses that were destroyed right after the war. It took maybe 2 or 3 days after the war to destroy them, and actually there's no protocol for that. We couldn't find a specific protocol for the order who gave the order to destroy those houses. There were few people involved in that, and if you remember, we showed in our presentation a small-scale map that was done by these people. We think that at the beginning, the decision was to maybe destroy a small number of those houses that are closer to the wall. But when those constructors came with those huge bulldozers, they tore down the entire quarter. And this was, I think today, it was a horrible thing, because no one asked, is it the right thing to do? They were destroyed because, as we said, there was a strong need for space in front of the Western Wall. The plaza was so narrow, so limited, and the expectation was that there will be thousands of people coming to the place. So they decided to destroy everything. And I think it has to do also with the reality before 1948 in the place. If you read the testimonies of Jews visiting the Western Wall, you read that there was a lot of hatred between the people living in these quarters and the visiting Jews in the Western Wall. So there was maybe something that was related to those relationships when those houses were destroyed during the war. So I hope I answered this question. We suspect, by the way, that it was Teddy Kollek, the very famous mayor of Jerusalem, who was maybe one of the key figures in ordering the destroy of this quarter. So maybe Kobi, if you want to.
I will continue.
Yep.
I'll start with the second question from Sean about pilgrimage to Zionist holy sites in Israel today. I think we can, for example, mention what we call a Zionist pilgrimage to, for example, Rachel tomb in Kinneret Cemetery near the Kinneret Lake. People are coming to this place. They are singing there, dancing around this place. This is a kind of a place that it's really a place, we can call him a holy place for a civic society or for a secular Israelis pilgrimage who are coming to this place. And we have lots of examples of places that are becoming very important to the civic society, and they are not holy in the classic terms, as we can say about the Western Wall or any other holy places. So in Israel today, yes, we have, and we can have, for example, Rabin grave in Mount Herzl is also such kind of holy Zionist site. Now about the first question about in what kind the changes that occurred in the Western Wall are reflects what we see in the Israeli society. This is a very complicated question, and what we try to do in our book is to see the few of the problems that we can see that we can see in the plaza that are reflected in the society, but we cannot really say that what is going on the plaza is exactly what we can see in the Israeli society, because the Israeli society is very complicated and more complicated than what we can see in the plaza. But what we can see in the plaza is very related to few of the main problems that we have in our society. So it's not one-to-one, but what we can see in the plaza is really one of the major problems that we are dealing with. For example, the question about state and religion. Yes, I think this is one of the main issues that we can see reflections between the two parts. Yes, I hope I try to deal with this question because it's too complicated. Yeah.
Can I add to what Kobi just said, if it's okay? The question about Zionist holy places, question mark. I see it maybe in a little bit different way than Kobi. I think that if we'll map what is going on today in Israel in terms of holy sites, we'll see a very a huge change or a growing number of Jewish holy places, I would say, and not Israeli Zionist places. I think that the Zionist religion is losing its power. And I think that more and more Israelis are becoming more observant, religious, and they are seeking a connection to God. And this is why we find lots of activity, not only in historical holy sites like the Western Wall, Rachel's tomb, the cave of the patriarchs in Hebron, but also more and more in, let's say, cemeteries. Cemeteries like Har HaMenuchot Cemetery in Jerusalem, where you find the resting places of important rabbis, Oriental rabbis and Ashkenazi rabbis, that their tombs became places of veneration, places of pilgrimage. And this is something completely different than the reality that was created in Israel right after 1948. Then the situation was reversed. Many Israelis venerated places like Masada and the Mount Herzl and Tel Chai, and few Israelis venerated the tombs of the rabbis. Today, we see an opposed situation. Masada is not being seen anymore, I think, as a holy site. Modi'in is not a holy place. And during most of the year, Mount Herzl is empty of its tomb. Is actually empty of Israelis who prefer to go to other places. So that's how I see the changing map of pilgrimage, national pilgrimage and Jewish pilgrimage in Israel during this time, 70 years after the establishment of the state.
I don't see any other questions coming in, so let me just maybe again abuse my role and power as moderator to ask you maybe, Doron and Kobi, to reflect a little bit further on this last point. Why do you think, Doron and Kobi, do you think this change that you have just described? Why is it that Tel Chai is abandoned? Why is it that Har Herzl is abandoned? Why is it that they are not used as pilgrimage sites in the civic sense even today? Does this indicate something about the state of Israel, the state of Zionism in Israel today, or what?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Doron, you have to explain, because I think we are not agreed.
Yeah. We see it in a different way.
On this point.
We see it in a different way.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
I see it, by the way, as a positive point, and as a good sign of the Israeli society, because making a pilgrimage to Masada and Tel Chai is something maybe artificial. It's not really a holy site. And maybe the fact that we don't need any more Herzl, and we do need Rachel and Abraham and Joseph, is a good sign, because Herzl was a kind of a pivot, a connecting figure used by David Ben-Gurion, the prime minister, as a connecting figure of those people who came from Yemen, came from Poland, came from Russia, and all of us connected to Herzl. So maybe we don't need him anymore. We don't need Herzl, and we can go back to our ancestors, to Rachel, to Joseph, to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the north. And I think that more Israelis feel connected to those Tanaim and Amoraim who are buried in the Galilee than to the resting place of Yosef Trumpeldor. They are coming there quite easily. The government has to arrange the ceremony in Yud Aleph Be'adar in order that people would come and visit Yosef Trumpeldor. But the government doesn't need to arrange the pilgrimage to those many tombs of the righteous in the Galilee. It happens very spontaneously, of course.
This I can agree, but I think we have to start with the definition of what is holy.
Right.
And you said that Masada is not holy anymore. I think this is I'm disagreed. Masada is holy, but not in the classical way of definition of what is holy. Masada is holy because of the history of the place, and it's not holy. It's not a religion's holiness, but it's an Israeli's holiness, and I think it's still holy. And we need Herzl. We need Herzl. I hope that we will still needed him. Otherwise, we will just stuck with the religious, and this will be a huge problem.
Okay, so you see two
But
different.
maybe Sean want to add something? Could you speak, Sean?
Professor Esther.
Hold on, I've got to unmute him. Please hold.
You've both raised very interesting points, and I appreciate. I'm glad to hear that there are people from Kobi who are coming to places like the poetess Rachel's tomb in the kibbutz in the north and gathering and singing. I think in terms of the mass numbers, the phenomenon that Doron is describing is certainly the mass numbers phenomenon. Hundreds of thousands of people come to the tombs of the righteous in the Galilee. Far fewer are coming now to the Tel Chai ceremony. That's just in terms of numbers. And I think it's an interesting point about how the state as a sort of defining force in people's identity has gone down, and other types of identity based on being Jewish, based on an ethnicity, a particular type of being Jewish, have risen to replace the state as the defining form in people's identity. And this also relates to what's happening at the Kotel.
Right.
So we have thank you so much, Sean. So now we have a really nice impromptu conversation with our panelists, with the panel expanding, and the panelists have multiple different voices and views on these subjects. We do have a few more minutes, and so let me just maybe then put another issue on the table, and that is, and I'm not suggesting that I disagree, Doron, with what you said, but I have never been to Masada and not seeing masses and masses of Taglit groups coming. I've never been to Ben Gurion's grave in Sde Boker and not seeing masses and masses Taglit groups, young Jews from the diaspora coming, learning, finding out, paying respects, whatever the organizers decide. So maybe there is an international Jewish diaspora element here that keeps some kind of a Zionist pilgrimage stand still alive, although it's not from within Israel. Agree, disagree, or your reactions, please.
It's interesting that you mentioned Taglit. And these are groups who are coming from abroad. These are Jews living in Canada or, I don't know, the US or whatever.
But they become Israelis tomorrow. They become Israelis tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's hope so. But the groups of Taglit are definitely visiting Mount Herzl and Masada and other places. But what is interesting is what's happening with the Israeli youth, with the Israeli schools. And when you follow them, when they go to Mount Herzl, well, some of the groups will go and venerate Herzl's tomb, and they will speak about his story. But most of the groups are going to the military cemetery, which is another part of Mount Herzl, and they will go and visit Rabin's tomb. This I feel is completely different than the way the Israelis felt towards these places during the first decades after the establishment of the state. Now, there's another issue, and is that how do you visit Masada? What do we hear from the guides? And during those 30s and 40s and 50s, you heard how strong and how important were those last defenders who lost their lives in Masada. Today, you will not hear this story. It will be told as not a positive, heroic thing to do, to commit suicide, what they did there. So today the guides are looking at the story of Masada in a completely different way than it was told during those years that I've mentioned. This is also another important thing to see the story of Masada.
Mm-hmm.
Kobi, thank you, Doron. Kobi, any reactions? Any final comments?
It's an antique discussion between Doron and me, and we're still good friends.
Yeah,
and that is wonderful.
This is an opportunity to thank Kobi. You know that usually most of us write articles and books alone, and the two of us are cooperating for many years and writing together articles and books. We have now a new project, so it's really it's great. It's nehedar to work together.
And
we didn't plan it. It was really a very nice cooperation, and we are still very good friends.
Kobi, Doron, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much for spending this evening, Israeli evening, Montreal daytime, with us, and for bringing such an intellectual treat to our screens. Normally would say to our classrooms, seminar rooms, but of course can't say that anymore. And I certainly hope that when COVID is going to be behind us, and we'll return to Israel with our students from Montreal for our regular summer learning tour, maybe perhaps we can connect with you so that you could share this fascinating story also with our young students from Concordia University. So we are now reaching the end of this event. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is also the end of our activities for calendar year 2020. We are now entering the examination period at Concordia University. So that means that students are getting increasingly busier, professors also with marking papers and so forth. But we so much look forward to many more opportunities to welcome you, members of the community and the audience, to join us for more exciting conversations and discussions such as this in calendar year 2021. I would like to thank and acknowledge the never-failing assistance that I get from Jennifer Solomon, my assistant at the Israeli Institute of Israel Studies. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for showing the slides, sharing the slides as I make my last few announcements and comments. Those of you who are interested in purchasing a book that we have just launched on the screen in Montreal, you are going to be able to avail yourselves of it by visiting either the Brill or the Amazon website. And so once again, Doron and Kobi, I would like to thank you ever so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
And members of the audience, thank you for your never-failing interest. We look forward to seeing you again in calendar year 2021. And as we are getting ready for Hanukkah, that was mentioned so often today in connection with Modi'in, of course, it's too early to wish Hanukkah Sameach, but perhaps it's never too early. So I wish everyone a wonderful festival coming, and go easy on the sweets, and may we all stay healthy and safe during the pandemic period. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.